Welcome back to Behind the Title. We are your hosts, Bobbie Grenier
And Jessica Mongue.
Thank you so much for joining us. We have launched our first episode where you got to know a little bit about us and what we were planning to do with this podcast. So now we're jumping into business, and we are starting off with something that really is impactful and can derail a closing. These are three things that can derail your closing. And we're not talking about underwriting. We're not talking about title issues. We're talking about when everybody comes into the closing room and these three things come up that can derail the whole deal. So, Jess, why don't you start us off with number one?
I'd love to. And this happens more frequently, I think, than people realize. But buyer or seller showing up and either don't have a valid ID with them, photo ID, or it's expired. And again, this is something that's completely preventable right from the get-go. And when I'm out talking to agents, Bobbie, I always ask them, is it part of your process when you're meeting with a new client and you might be signing that exclusive buyer representation or seller representation agreement with them? Is it part of your process to ask them for a photo ID? And if not, why? Because there's a million reasons why you should be.
That's actually a really great point, and because we say it again and again and again and again. And it's kind of funny because I used to, admitting time here, I used to be a little bit jaded, like, okay, they knew their license had expired. What are they talking about? Until one day I went to the grocery store and I got carded. And I know it's just the lottery of like, when it pops up on the register, I was under no impression that they thought I was under 21, but it felt good for just a second. So, I'm all puffed up and I whip out my ID. It had expired. And I'm like, okay, Bobbie Grenier, there you go. Don't ever think that again.
Absolutely. It happens all the time. And it's just one of those things that you just forget about it. There's a million things going on in life in the day-to-day, right? Time goes by in a blink. And next thing you know, that ID is expired. So again, it's something that's completely preventable, and there are certain steps along the process where you'll be reminded, make sure you have your valid photo ID, and other people should also be reminding you as, your representation as either a buyer or seller, make sure you have that valid photo ID. But there's been at least 3 instances that I can think of this year where I have had a client show up to the table and unfortunately they packed it away in a box or it's expired. So it's just super important that right from the get-go, when you realize that you're either going to be purchasing or selling your home, okay, let's just check to make sure that I've got all my ducks in a row. And this is a very big duck.
It's a huge duck. This might even be a goose. I don't know. Yeah. So, I just kind of want to start off like, why do we need that ID? For buyers and sellers, the very basic reason that we need it is we are notarizing documents. And as notaries in Maine and every other state, we're required to get a valid, unexpired, government-issued picture ID. Can you give me some examples, Jess, of what would pass for a good ID?
Sure. Closing? So obviously a valid driver's license for any state. Passport is great. If you don't have a driver's license, there is a whole section of young adults that are coming up that are actually choosing not to get their license for whatever reason. So a state ID also works in those instances if you're not driving. Those are the 3 that I always recommend to people that we will accept.
Yeah, we also can take a military ID. That works. Do not come at us with a Sam's Club card or a BJ's card. Don't do it. So we need that unexpired photo, government-issued picture ID. Another reason that we need it, and you and I were just talking about this before we started recording, another reason we need it is because we, more often than not, have to fill out a U.S. Patriot form. So this is an anti-money laundering, anti-terrorism measure that has been put in place. We have to fill out the form. And to do that, again, government issued unexpired picture ID. And you had a little bit of experience recently on that with lenders.
I did. And so it was always my experience and expectation in the past that as part of the pre-qualification process, when borrowers are applying for a loan, that lenders are asking for a copy of that ID. So this was news to me when I recently had a transaction. And again, one of the buyers showed up, her ID had expired. I got on the phone with one of the processors at the mortgage company and asked, and I said, hey, when this person, started to go through the process with you guys, was it valid at that point in time? It was my understanding that that's normally collected. And they came back and said, we actually don't require that anymore. The borrower was able to go right out to the DMV the next day and get it reissued, which again, all the stars had to line up for this because a lot of times you have to get appointments nowadays. So
yeah, there are things we can do. And please don't think that we're like, want a gotcha moment. That is like the biggest wah at a closing, because the first thing you do, you gather everybody's ID, you're checking IDs. So we definitely are not wanting this to happen. And there are times that there's nothing you can do except send them to the DMV and, say a prayer and fingers crossed, because my stepson just got his driver's license and my husband took him to the DMV and they sat for 3.5 hours and they still didn't get in. They had to go to a dentist appointment, so they still didn't get in. So the moral of that story is, do not think that you can run to the DMV, get this done, and then come back to the closing. It could take a good part of a day to get that done. We'll wait. We'll do whatever we need to do. We'll explore other forms of ID. Some people are like, oh no, my driver's license is expired, but I have my passport. Beautiful. Great. So we're definitely looking to work with you to make sure it happens. But I guess the takeaway for real estate agents is, please mention that. I know there's so much information coming at them from real estate agents, from lenders, from the title company. It's a lot of information, and that's not lost on us. We totally get it, and we want to work with everybody. So if we can all just double check, even if they hear it 3 times, 4 times, they're going to be like, yes, okay, yes, I have my ID. Leave me alone about it. But that's much better than having this, I didn't know, I didn't think about it. So that's really the biggest thing that can derail a closing with an ID. And fraud, obviously, is another aspect, but that's an episode all on its own. And I don't want to take away from the fact that that's something, walking into the closing room, everyone's excited. They're going to sign their paperwork. They're going to get their keys. Everything's great, and can derail the closing very, very quickly. Let's jump on to number 2. What do you got, Jess?
So number 2, and again, unfortunately, I feel like we see this all the time for whatever reason, but it's not arranging to have your closing funds ahead of time. And there's a million different reasons why that could be, right? Maybe we're down to the wire with a last minute addendum, or there was an appraisal issue and there really hasn't been enough time to get that final figure from the lender. So there's some caveats to all of this, but generally, if everything's going smooth in the way that it should in a transaction, there should be plenty of time by the time we release a final figure in the settlement statement to the parties, to them showing up at closing and knowing ahead of time the amount, but also how they're going to get us that amount, whether it be in a certified check or if they're going to initiate a wire.
Yeah, definitely. And I do want to back up just a little bit, because we are sticklers about this, and there are reasons for that. We are heavily monitored and audited, as it should be. And just to put it very simply, if my funds are in the Trilogy escrow account, and you come to closing and there's any kind of disbursement without all of your funds, then you're using somebody else's funds. That's not okay, and that's not something that we can arrange, even if it's, a real estate agent, or, we just can't disperse any funds. So I know we get some pushback on that and not really understanding, but that's really the bottom line. We need to stay compliant. We need to be responsible and ethical with the funds that we're entrusted with your closing. And talking about how we're going to get the funds, we have a standard of $500. So we cannot take a personal check for over $500. So now we get into a bank certified check. Again, sometimes people are in Maine. They've been here for a short period of time. Their bank is Wells Fargo. So they cannot go to a local. There are no local Wells Fargos in Maine. So if they don't have the opportunity to get to the bank, you need to start thinking about other things. The other thing we run into is wires. Some banks require that you go into the bank, Wells Fargo being one of them, and initiate that wire. You cannot do it online. You cannot do it by phone call. Please, please make sure you know how your bank will disperse funds, what they require from you, and think ahead. And it stinks in this business that it can be last minute. It totally stinks, but it's the nature of it. Everybody is trying to pull everything together, and it's just one of those things that, we all have different arms. I always talk about title as herding cats. You're trying to get the lender, and the real estate agent, buyers, sellers, everybody in together and have it all come together in a neat package that we call the Alta settlement statement to provide that figure. And it sometimes does happen last minute.
And that's just another day in real estate, Bobbie, right?
Absolutely.
Every transaction is different. And as much as we want it to all be cookie cutter, and we know the proper steps of how things are supposed to go, that's not real estate and that's not real life. So it is what it is. We're always going to do our best to advocate and to get you your figure plenty of time in advance. But when you start this process, you should be thinking about, in my opinion, very early on, like you said, okay, where's my bank? Who do I bank with? What's their policy? Do I plan on going in and grabbing a certified check, or would I prefer to wire, or do I have to wire because there's not a local branch around here? And again, agents having those conversations early on, especially if you know that your clients are moving from out of state. That should be your red flag almost immediately, to be like, okay, we need to stop and have this conversation about how we're going to get those funds to the closing table, because more likely than not, they may be working with a bank that is not located up here, or we just don't have a physical branch. So how are we going to make sure that we get that well in advance so there's no delays?
And that can be a delay because your seller may be moving on to purchase within the same day, and bless anybody that does sells and buys in the same day. But it happens all the time. We all see it all the time. So that, again, can start this domino effect that your seller isn't able to move on to go have the funds for their closing. So this is prevention. This is education. This is thinking ahead, asking questions. And for real estate agents, if you're unsure exactly what the process is, what's okay, what's required, what the time frame is, please reach out. We are always happy to have that conversation.
I think it's also so important to, again, when you are drafting that purchase and sale, what day are you shooting for closing? And potentially when you get closer to the closing, what time are you looking to schedule? Because that's also going to affect some of this process for your client if they're going to wire, because banks have wire cutoff times. We also have wire cutoff times if we need to send funds somewhere else for one of those transactions that comes after one closes. So there's all these additional pieces that we also need to be aware of when it comes to this stuff to make sure that, again, everybody's getting their money where it needs to be in the timely manner that it needs to be arriving in. Wires are also not instantaneous, right, Bobbie? Like a lot of people think that they are.
Absolutely. And I had a lot of people that have said, it's left my bank. It's left my bank. And it's like, that is a great sign. It's in cyberspace somewhere. But the funds actually have to show up in our bank. We need to verify. We do have, and I'm not sure actually if you know this, just because we don't use it a lot, but I have had a few instances where somebody has not been able to initiate a wire. So we do have through our Closing Lock platform, they can do an ACH.
I didn't know that.
Only through Closing Lock. Yeah. Yeah. So that's saved a few transactions. Again, it does take a little bit longer, but it shows up in our account as a wire. So that is another avenue. We're constantly just looking for ways to sidestep and make this process easier and just come up with solutions, right?
Definitely.
We're problem solvers all the time. Okay, Jess, let's jump into the third thing that can derail a closing at the closing table.
Absolutely, Bobbie. So, and again, this is something that you probably wouldn't even think happens during the course of a transaction, but unfortunately, sometimes it does. And that is missing required signers actually not coming up to the closing.
Yes. And again, that might seem like, okay, of course our signers are going to come to the closing, but there are circumstances where maybe husband and wife are purchasing a property, only husband's on the loan, so they don't think wife needs to show up. However, she's on title, so she is required to sign the mortgage and some of the other title documents. So there are times that it might be reasonable to somebody to think that another party doesn't need to show up, but it can stall the closing because it cannot go forward if we don't have everybody in our presence to sign. But with a little bit of ahead of time planning, what are some things we can do?
Thankfully, there's so many ways that we can, one, accommodate somebody that can't show up to the closing, or also hopefully mitigate an issue if somebody doesn't show up the day of. But of course, we always want to dig into our tool belt to make sure that that doesn't happen. So there could be a power of attorney that could be drafted potentially for somebody if we know in advance that they are unable to come to the closing. There's also lots of situations where we can do a RON signing, which is remote online notarization with a party. Thankfully, we have quite a few trained remote online notaries within the company that can assist with that. And that is an amazing tool that has been implemented within the last couple of years within the company. And then also we can arrange for a notary sometimes to come right to somebody's house or a location prior to the actual closing date, or do a traditional mail away for somebody. So there's actually a lot of different solutions to this problem. We just have to know in advance.
Yeah, those are all great solutions, all very realistic and relatively easy to implement for us. So if you know ahead of time that there's going to be a problem with everybody attending the closing, or if you're questioning, I mean, that's the thing. Usually it's, oh gosh, I didn't think they needed to be here. Jess, why don't you give us a recap of our 3 top things that can derail a closing?
I'd love to, Bobbie. Thank you. So the first thing that we talked about today was making sure that you have valid photo identification to the closing. Bring a second copy if you're questioning. It's always a best practice. Have a backup. Second piece, please make sure that you know in advance how you're getting your funds to the closing. Huge part of this. And the third one is, of course, we just talked about, please double check who needs to actually show up and make sure that all of those parties are present or have arranged a different situation with us prior.
All great points, and we thank you so much for listening. As always, it's teamwork. We need to do this together. We need to communicate. We need to talk with each other. We need to problem solve together. So, Jess, how can everybody listen to the podcast?
So please be sure, if you're enjoying what you're listening to today, give us a 5-star review. You can get us on Spotify, on Apple Music. There's a link on our Trilogy and Baldacci website that you can follow to listen to us to. You can catch us on YouTube. Did I miss one, Bobbie?
Audible.
Thank you. Yeah.
And share with your colleagues if you want to help us grow, if you want to support us. And if you have any ideas, please reach out to myself, to Jess. We want to know what would be helpful to you.
Again, thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on Behind the Title.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Behind the Title, the official podcast of Trilogy and Baldacci Real Estate Closing Services, with your hosts, Bobbie Grenier, and Jessica Mongue. Remember, this podcast is for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes only and not intended as legal advice. Please remember to follow and rate the show and share this episode with a friend.